Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 24 of Changing the Face of Yoga. I'm talking to Christine Wuschke about how she infuses Ahimsa throughout her classes. Hello, I want to introduce Christine Wuschke. Christine has been teaching yoga since 1997. That's 20 years now, wow. And is the author of Freedom is Your Nature, A Practical Guide to Transformation, and creator of the Easy Yoga for Beginners DVD. And I did look at part of your DVD about standing poses, and I really appreciated your instructions. I thought the way you said them and could be a great way to do it. It was much softer than some of the instructions I've been taught. I just wanted to tell you how great I thought those were at this point, but we'll get on to that later. She's a longtime yoga teacher, a meditation instructor, a myofascial release therapist, and a certified Hakomi practitioner. And she's decided to merge all of these specialties. And one of the things that we're definitely going to talk about today is how she has merged these specialties into providing classes and probably workshops and stuff that really embody the notion of ahimsa, or of a safe place. Really fascinated by that idea, and I really think that Christine can help us in that area. So, Christine, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you. That's definitely all of that is great. I think that the topic I'm really passionate about is ahimsa and creating safety. And a long-time yoga practitioner, I've been hearing ahimsa and hearing the term nonviolence. And as I started really getting deep into a mindfulness-based practice and got more and more into the Hakomi community, I started realizing how much more depth there was to this practice then. And I was only scratching the surface before. And of course, if you ask me in 20 years, I'll probably say the same thing. But I'm still only scratching the surface now. But I am quite excited about how much it's done for me in my life and in my practice. And I think it can be a very, very healing space for a lot of people.
Okay, so you talk about having a safe place. For yoga. Could you kind of define that for me, or what that means to you?
Yeah. So it's tricky to define safety because it is quite a personal thing. What might be a safe place for me might not be safe for you, but it is. So it's you can't really say safety is one thing universally across the board. But one kind of common thread in it would be presence and attunement. So if I'm able to be present in myself and enter a space of mindful awareness or mindful alertness, and then I step into sync with you, then I can, in Hakomi we call it tracking, then I can kind of track your little body movements and your facial expressions and very subtle things that I see happening in your space would give me feedback as to how safe you are feeling. So it's a little bit like, you know, they talk about like horse whispering and stuff like that with animals. And I think there is an equivalent to that with human beings, that we are mammals and we have very complex nervous systems and we get scared very easily. But we can also skip over that really easily. And so it's really about slowing everything down and getting kind of really tuned into your class or your students or your client, and then just kind of noticing if there's resistance or closing in, and then we kind of go from there to create safety.
I noticed that in some of the material that you gave me that you were talking about taking the principles of myofascial release, which is finding a blockage or finding an area that needed help, but not pushing it, just allowing it to become less tight or whatever the particular issue might be. So could you kind of expand a bit on that? Because I thought that was
absolutely. And it's so important on the level of the body. And I just, before I go into that, I just want to really take a minute to make the distinction too, because there's multiple kinds of myofascial release out there. And so I'll have clients come to me and they'll be like, I went to a myofascial release session. It was so painful and, you know, so aggressive. And so I just want to really kind of specify that I'm talking about John Barnes' style of myofascial release, which is kind of a different approach to working with fascia than some of the other styles out there. And not to say that one's right and one's wrong, but that's kind of one of the things that he really, really specifies, is that you can't force this system. And if you want that melt to happen, if you want that release to happen, that you have to be able to get in under the nervous system's defense mechanisms. And if you go too hard, too fast, you're going to get into, the nervous system's going to start to protect and brace. And it kind of gets in the way of real deep healing. So there's an approach to this style of myofascial release that's you very, very, very slowly lean in until you feel even a little hint of resistance, and then you stop there and you wait, and you'll kind of feel them let you in, and then you can go sink a little further, but you kind of go to the, what we call the barrier, and you just wait, and you wait for that to soften on its own, not to push through it. And so what I've noticed is that particular principle really applies through yoga and movement too, but the mindfulness piece has to be there, because if I'm not in my body, if I'm not connected to my body, then as I'm going through movement, I can really easily miss those places where those resistances are popping up. So the myofascial release is really the same. It's creating safety on the physical level.
If you're in a class and someone, and I'm a teacher too, so I understand this, that really aren't connected very well to their body, and they're pushing themselves, how do you take care of that as a teacher?
That's a fantastic question, because it does happen.
Yes. Yes, it does.
I like to start with permission and giving an invitation to really slow down and to really be still. And so sometimes it's just a matter of setting the stage in those first few minutes of class. So my studio is in the basement, so it kind of starts when they walk down the stairs, and then in that first few minutes of class to kind of almost like set up a container in those first few moments of what we're going to do, and enter mindfulness kind of right there. Which isn't always easy to do when you're rushing in and you're late for class and you're stuck in traffic and your nervous system's all revved up. So to go from 100 to 0 is tricky. And so I always start by naming that we're gonna start to slow down, and that might be challenging right now. And sometimes in just naming that, it's like, oh, okay. And then I would say maybe give them permission to arrive here at your own pace. Take as long as you need to get here. And that invitation, just kind of giving permission for it to go into their pace, can sometimes just be that can set the stage. Okay. And then, if you're kind of tracking the room and you're still seeing a lot of that push, to just kind of name it. And I call it reverse engineering the pose, So when I see it, then I just say, how about we do that pose backwards now, and let's go back to Tadasana or something like that, and we'll go back and come again slower. And why don't we try it to 1/4 today and see how that feels? So just a couple ideas.
I like that reverse engineering. I've seen going, how would I do that? And I go, oh yeah. Okay, that's great. You've also kind of gotten into the area of trauma, which I can see as being very related to what you are doing in your classes and your workshops. Did you come about that? I mean, I don't know, you're in Canada, right? I'm in Australia. I know it's become very much more common and in the kind of the general idea of what yoga is to also address trauma issues. But is this something that's happening in Canada, or was this something that you decided because of your own personal studies that needed to be added?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago was when I started entering the Hakomi world. And it was the Hakomi method that introduced me to somatic trauma therapy. And so that was kind of really the first I'd heard of accessing trauma in this particular way and working with trauma in this particular way. And, through my Hakomi training, it was quite a few years long, and somewhere in there, it did seem to get kind of, I don't know, quote unquote popular. The trauma-informed yoga started becoming more well-known and more appreciated. So I don't know if it was there before and I just noticed it now because it was in my awareness field, or if it had been, but it's pretty, I would say, well respected in the yoga community in Canada, that trauma-informed classes are kind of seen as something very much needed and very much appreciated. And a lot of therapists will refer their patients to classes with teachers that have taken some type of training in that area. So I'm not sure if the culture is the same in Canada as Australia, but it's definitely it's a big movement here.
Okay, it seems to be here too, in that. We have someone actually here where I live who's doing called frontline therapy, or yoga, frontline yoga. And it's for the frontline responders, the police and the fire.
Oh, wow.
Nurses and doctors, that are in these high stress kinds of situations and see a lot of trauma and probably may experience a lot of trauma. So, I'm hoping to get her on the podcast. But anyway, I personally have not taken any of this kind of training at this point. So how do you kind of change your classes, or do you? Perhaps you don't.
Oh, yeah.
If you feel you have some trauma afflicted, shall we say, people who are in there.
I do. I very much will change. So I'm kind of always tracking the room and, kind of scanning for signs of trauma activation, and trauma is held in the body. So it's pretty easy for it to surface in a yoga class when we're holding a space like that and giving permission for somebody to enter into their body and feel and breathe. So it can definitely surface. And what I like to do, and this is sort of what I tell my teachers too, is to not necessarily kind of have the mindset that I'm going to heal that trauma right now. And because that would be sort of inappropriate and not necessarily the right space for that in that moment, but to create safety around it, to make sure that if trauma activation is starting to happen, that I've named it in a really safe way, and that at the end of class there's room for that student to come and talk to me, and that I'm able to resource them in some way. So I have a referral list that I'll give, if you want to go to a Hakomi therapist, or if you would like to go to a trauma therapist, or if you'd like to go to a psychologist, I'll have kind of a list of people, or just like a really good quality body worker that's trained in some somatic trauma work as well, to just hand that list to them so that they're really resourced. But in the moment that trauma appears to be surfacing, you kind of can't go wrong with being a really kind adult in that moment. And just to be really present and to really be there, and to say things or word things in a way that facilitates that person to trust their body in that moment, that what's happening is natural, what's happening is normal, your body knows what it's doing. Like, say you're seeing something like shaking, which is a common one, or trembling, and to just really normalize that can happen, and that's really normal, and it's going to pass, and you're doing great, and your body knows exactly what it's doing, and this is discharging some old energy, and you're doing great. And to maybe, then carry on with it, because you can't really stay with them for you have other people there. So to kind of carry on, but give that person permission to come see you after class. Okay. And then just resource them with. So I think it's kind of ethically responsible for yoga teachers to have referral lists, especially for things like trauma, because it's so common that it comes up. And we as yoga teachers, it's out of our scope to be trauma healers. We can be trauma informed, but we're not really there to heal their PTSD or whatever it is. But we are kind of ethically responsible to refer them to someone who is really good at that. We know is really good at that, and that's their superpower. And here's that list. And I always say, it takes a tribe to heal a person.
Yes,
so
it does.
Yoga is one stop along the way.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great tip. That's really excellent. I'm going to move a little bit over about adjustments.
Yeah, big topic.
Yeah. Well, I teach seniors, so I have often a frail and vulnerable population, and I'm very opposed to adjustments in general, but particularly for my group of people. How do you, as a person who's trying to keep a very safe place in Ahimsa inspired class, do with adjustments?
Well, I do see value in, I'll put it this way, that there is a huge amount of value in loving human touch. And so I've also seen that I have seen a lot of violence in the adjustments. If it's mindless and if it's not attuned, it can cause harm. And so I would love to kind of keep this topic open and keep hearing from experienced yoga teachers, and how do we address this and how do we solve this problem? We don't want people injured in yoga. But I also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, let's be a touch-free studio and never touch, because there's a lot to be gained by touch. So I kind of feel like maybe at one point the pendulum swang a little bit all the way over to nobody's going to do adjustments, into, I think, I feel like we're kind of ethically responsible as yoga teachers to do some form of adjustment, even if it's just verbal or visual or reverse engineering, in order to make sure that that they're doing things, that they're not doing a pose in a way that's going to overload something or harm them in some way. Do you know what I mean?
No, I do. And I think I want to make that distinction that. Which I didn't do before, so that's on me on that one. But
that's why I say this is a big topic.
Yeah, yeah, right. I do give verbal instructions, and I, talk a lot about knees in front of ankles and stuff like that. But what I'm more, I think, concerned about is, like you said, the violence that sometimes happens in adjustments, and the underlying premise that we all have to look the same in a pose.
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's huge, that it's that the pose, I think we can get that in our head, that if I'm doing Warrior 2, I need to shape my body to look like that Instagram post I saw yesterday of this perfect 90-degree angle.
Yeah.
And I think that can be, it can be a little bit violent to sort of set that precedence that here's what the pose looks like, and I have to somehow mold my body into that shape when my body might not be appropriate for this body or that body. So I've kind of wanted to get away from that too. So I think we're, probably doing a very similar thing.
I agree that sometimes adjustments need to be made for safety reasons more than anything else.
On the thread of safety. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that fits in well with your safe place, that you don't want them to push their bodies to something that may be harmful or,
Yeah. And so I explore this in my, like when I teach teachers, I explore this a lot, and we break this down for like days.
Really?
Because I think it's that important. And one of the little experiments I'll get them to do is to stand about 5 feet away from each other, and one person's partner A, one person's partner B. One of the partners is going to close their eyes. The other one is going to start walking toward them really slowly. And this is done in mindfulness. So when you do things in mindfulness, everything is kind of heightened. And what the objective is to feel, when do you become aware of that person entering your personal space? Like, when do they kind of pop your bubble kind of thing? And, we practice doing it with our eyes open. We practice doing it with our eyes closed. We practice doing it with a hand coming toward you really slow and in mindfulness. And the reason why I like to do it is because it's actually quite alarming and quite startling how violent it can feel if a hand is rushing toward you and you're in mindfulness. So if I'm very quiet and I'm very still, and all of a sudden somebody's coming toward me very quickly, and I know the intention is that they're going to touch me, my whole system can tense up really quickly. And so the objective in this experiment is that they experience that. They sort of track their own nervous system and go, whoa, wow, did I ever feel you coming? And maybe we should slow that down. And then we slow it down, and it's like, whoa, I still felt that. Can we slow it down even more? And just kind of tweaking that and fine tuning that back and forth until we kind of refine what it's like to move towards someone really solid in that principle of attunement and mindfulness and nonviolence. And then what the partner is experiencing is, now I feel really safe, and now I'm noticing my system open and soften. And now I actually would like for you to put your hand on my shoulder and show me where it would be good to go. So that's the type of adjustment I like, but I think that it takes a long time to really cultivate that kind of touch and that kind of awareness and that kind of syncing up, that kind of attunement with another person.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. And I agree with you. I think that it would not be something that would happen overnight. It would be a long-term relationship, shall we say, between the teacher and the student.
Exactly. Yeah. Because touch can be very healing, but it can also be very activating.
Yeah.
And it can be threatening. And we don't know the person's history, and touch to one person might mean something completely different to touch to another body. So it can be, yes, it's a big topic.
It is.
Yeah, when I do my teacher trainings, I take about 4 days on on this topic, like 4 full days, just because that's how that's how significant I think it is. That because I didn't want to just approach it as we're not going to do adjustments at all, but so if we are going to do it, then we have to take a lot of time to really refine what this means, so that we can maintain that container of safety. And it's tricky.
I'm sure it is.
It's a tricky area. Yeah.
But I like that. I really like that idea that, yes, you can do adjustments for safety reasons, but that it takes a good relationship between student and teacher to make it okay, shall we say, and continue to be safe. So that's great. I like that. I'm going to use that.
and that there's consent, So if there's conscious consent between the teacher and student, then it's part of that kind of therapeutic environment. And I think that's part of what I was seeing as violent about adjustments in the past, is that there wasn't necessarily this open conscious consent being, like the table wasn't being set ahead of time. It was just assumed that it was okay for the teacher to just go right into the bubble of that person and touch them. And it's like, whoa. Yeah, especially if you're in mindfulness, because that can be a lot. Even just having somebody walk toward you can be a lot. So I like to I think mindfulness is extremely valuable, but it can also make people vulnerable. So it's to you're kind of always walking that little line of, it's a big responsibility to say, okay, I'm going to create this safe space, and which means I need to really stay present and stay mindful in myself.
And that would be your definition when you're talking about this, of mindfulness, of being really present in yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Ron Kurtz, the man that created the Hakomi method, his visual, I find this extremely helpful, is the way that he described it is that if I were to drop a pebble in a pond in order to observe the ripples, like let's say I wanted to really see how it rippled out, if the pond is very still and the pebble's really small, it's obvious to see how it's rippling out. And if the pond is kind of choppy and the pebble is small, it's hard to kind of gauge the impact that one little pebble is having. So mindfulness is kind of about initially settling in and becoming quiet, and then noticing, how did it feel when I raised, what was the impact of me raising my arm? And the more still I am, the more I notice. And the more busy I am, I mean, that's not quite true, but if I'm busy, there's less chance that I'll notice as much.
So it sounds to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, that your whole class is built around developing this mindfulness as you go through the asanas and the pranayama and shavasana. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I call it a mindfulness-based movement class. Sometimes I don't even use the word yoga. But so mindfulness-based movement or mindfulness-based yoga. And so we begin the class by just taking sometimes up to 10 minutes just to, because that's sometimes how long it takes to kind of get into mindfulness or to settle in. And then we go through the movements all kind of in mindfulness.
Might be something I could do with my classes,
Yeah, it's in general, people really appreciate it because it's a special part of their week to be able to have that, kind of a sacred space for themselves. It's like, okay, I'm coming in this room and I'm going to get into my little bubble here, and this is time for me to be with me, and I'm going to start putting attention into what would be good right now, and what would nourish my system right now. And when we really kind of set that as the tone and take that time, then all the breath is so much more, we get so much more bang for our buck, like just breathing is like, oh, yes. So nourishing. Yeah. So I think mindfulness adds a whole other dimension to it. It's really powerful.
You've mentioned Hakomi a couple of times,
Yes.
and for me and for the listeners, it would be good to have an idea of what that is. I assume it's some kind of system.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you are now a certified Hakomi practitioner, which is
Yes.
shows a lot of study and thought. So what does that mean to be a certified Hakomi practitioner?
Hakomi is a method of somatic trauma therapy created by a man named Ron Kurtz, who was a psychotherapist and a Buddhist, and he kind of wanted to incorporate a lot of the Buddhist principles into his practice, and was seeing that his patients were getting a lot more out of it when he did. So he created the system. It's a mindfulness-based therapy, so it's all done kind of in the body and through the body, and in mindfulness. I think the website is just hakomi.com, I'm pretty sure. And so listeners, if you're interested in it, it is a fantastic modality. So feel free to Google that. But it is, so it's a body-centered type of therapy. Kind of similar, I don't know, a lot of people have heard of Peter Levine. He does somatic experiencing, which is another kind of popular somatic trauma therapy. He was also in the Hakomi community. So does that explain it, or should I go on a little bit more?
No, I think that's great.
That covers it? Okay.
I now understand it.
What's that?
I said I think I might look into it, though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I highly recommend. One of the things I really noticed when I was going through the Hakomi training is that there was this overall, this teaching that kept coming through over and over and over again, was that the importance of creating safety and not applying force. So I mean, you can lean in and push a little bit when there's resistance just to match it, but to not try to push through, and to really just hold that safe place. And there's a principle in Hakomi called organicity, which is just that, if I were to take a little sprout and I were to create a good container for it that would give it the sun and give it the water and give it the safety so that nothing stomped on it, it can just thrive all on its own. It's got everything it needs in order to, become a flourishing plant. And that's kind of, people are like that if we can find a way for people's needs to be met on a lot of different levels, and we can create a safe container, then that person's own intelligence is just going to unfold, and they'll start to heal and thrive just all on their own. And their tissues are healing, and their brain is changing, and all of those changes are happening organically. And then when I got into myofascial release, I noticed John Barnes saying a lot of the very same things in his own language, which was that if we can meet the person where they are, if we can lean in and without triggering the nervous system's defenses, and we can just be this kind, listening adult, then their body will self-correct all on its own. So I found that kind of synchronistic when I was taking those two trainings at the same time, and noticed these two messages coming from two totally different backgrounds, but they were saying the same thing, which is the importance of nonviolence and safety, and then starting to see the flowering of people in my classes, and even in the results I was getting in my own body was pretty profound.
It is amazing sometimes when it seems like everything you look at is kind of what you're thinking about, and adding
so
to
true,
your,
right?
adding to your knowledge. I've been in those places, and you think, "Wow, did I just not notice this before?" Or what? Okay,
always here.
Yeah, really. What? Somebody's trying to tell me something, I think.
Wow. It's
well,
very,
Christine, this has been really interesting, and I really love all of the tips that you've given us to provide a safe space in our classes. Is there anything that you would particularly like to add at this point?
Yeah, I think that the one thing I'd really like to kind of say to yoga teachers is that to incorporate a little bit of a type of movement that is really attuned to resistance. So I often talk about using like a spongy ball that's really soft so that it's not going to, if it's really hard, it won't have the kind of the same particular effect. But, those little spongy balls you can pick up at the dollar store. And you get your students to just lay down on the ball and feel what that pressure is like in their body, and almost as if they're letting their body sink into soft sand and just noticing anywhere where there's holding or tension or tightness in the body, and then giving that a lot of time and a lot of permission to soften. And even if that's kind of done in the Shavasana space, or it's like we're going to do this 5-minute break between poses now where we're just going to lay here and let things melt. Even if it's just a 5-minute window in your class, it really starts to be profoundly impactful over time. And I think the whole practice really shifts and changes. And then the second thing I would also add in would be just organic movement can be a really great thing to add into classes where we're going to take 5 minutes and we're just going to close our eyes and we're just going to let the body move. And it can be, if you're seated on the floor, it can be really great kind of transition from sitting to standing. But it's a lot of safety and stuff is important too, right? Because people can feel awkward about it. But I like to just have everyone's eyes closed so that nobody's looking at anybody. And then we're just going to do some organic movement and just let the body do whatever it feels like it needs to do. And often people report that when we do that in class, they feel so much better at the end of class. And whenever organic movement is there, then the whole practice has felt different and better. So I think it could be. Yeah, it's just adding things into what you're already doing. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Now, if any of you'd like to get a hold of Christine to contact her, her email is journeytolight@gmail.com, and her website is freelyhuman, freelyhuman.com. I also looked at her book, Freedom is Your Nature, A Practical Guide to Transformation, and that's on Amazon, or you can get it through her website. And so I really want to thank you, Christine. I think you've given us just a multitude of tips on how to make a class feel safer and be safer. And I really, really appreciate it. I think that that's something that, as you said, there's a lot more to Ahimsa than we might realize. And these are excellent ways to live that precept in our classes. So thank you so much. Sounds like it's something that's really close to your heart. So
yes, very much.
Anything else you'd like to add?
All right, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.